Sweet Porridge. Once, in a humble village hemmed in by dark woods and wild meadows, there lived a poor but gentle girl with her widowed mother. Their cottage was small, their hearth cold, and their pantry bare, for fortune had long turned her face from them. Day by day, their bread grew thinner, their bones sharper, and their voices weaker from want. Yet the child never ceased to comfort her mother with kind words and hopeful glances, though her own stomach cried with hunger. One gray morning, when their cupboard held nothing but dust and their strength was nearly gone, the girl resolved to wander into the forest in search of roots, berries, or any scrap that might keep them alive a little longer. The trees stood tall and solemn, as if guarding secrets of the earth. She walked deeper and deeper until her feet ached and her courage nearly failed her. Then, as if out of mist, there appeared before her an aged woman, wrapped in a cloak the color of autumn leaves. Her eyes, though dimmed by years, shone with a knowing light, as if she could see into the very heart of the child. She asked softly, "Why do you walk with such sorrow, little one?" And the girl, being honest and without guile, told of their empty larder and of her mother who sat weary and faint at home. The old woman nodded, as though she had long expected this tale, and drew from her basket a small earthen pot. It looked ordinary, no finer than the humblest cooking vessel, yet the woman spoke to it as one might speak to a friend. "Cook, little pot, cook," she whispered, and at once from its hollow rose steam, and within bubbled porridge, golden, sweet, and fragrant. When she had shown the marvel, she spoke again. "Stop, little pot." And at once the bubbling ceased, leaving the vessel brimming, but no longer spilling. She placed the pot into the girl's hands and said, "Take this gift to your mother. So long as you remember the words, neither of you shall ever know hunger again." And before the child could thank her, the woman vanished among the trees like smoke carried by the wind. The girl hastened home, and when she cried, "Cook, little pot, cook," the vessel obeyed, filling the cottage with warmth and the sweet scent of porridge. She and her mother ate until their hunger was gone, and tears of joy filled their eyes. From that day forward, they were delivered from want, for whenever need arose, the pot provided, and with a word, it rested. Their lives, once so shadowed by hunger, were now brightened with plenty. Yet it happened one day that the girl went abroad to visit a neighbor, leaving her mother alone. The mother, wishing for a bowl of porridge, said the words she had heard so often: "Cook, little pot, cook." The pot began at once to boil and bubble, and the porridge was sweet as ever. She ate and ate until she could hold no more. But when she wished to bid the pot be still, the word escaped her memory. She frowned. She pleaded. She scolded. Yet the pot paid no heed. It boiled on, obedient only to the true command. Soon the porridge rose to the brim and spilled over the sides. It spread across the hearthstones. It streamed along the floorboards. It poured out the door into the street. Neighbors cried in alarm as the golden tide swept through the lane. The pot, unwearied, cooked and cooked, as if determined to feed not merely one house, but the whole world's empty mouths. The villagers tried to block it with boards and buckets, but still it flowed. It filled cellars and barns. It climbed over thresholds. It pressed against windows. First, one house drowned in porridge, then another, until the entire street lay beneath the steaming flood. The people wailed, for they saw no end to the disaster, and they feared their town would vanish beneath this strange and endless meal. At last, when but a single house stood untouched on the far edge of the town, the girl returned from her errand. She beheld with wide eyes the strange sight of her village smothered in porridge, and she understood at once what had befallen. She hurried home, waded through the steaming waves, and with a clear voice spoke the words, "Stop, little pot." Instantly, the vessel obeyed and grew still, as harmless as any ordinary pot. But the work was already done. Porridge lay in heaps through the streets and fields. Those who wished to return to their houses or pass through the town could do so only by eating their way back, spoonful by spoonful, mouthful by mouthful. And so it was said that never again did that town know hunger, for the little pot had fed them all beyond measure. And the girl and her mother lived content, their cottage ever warm, their table never bare, for they alone knew both the beginning and the end of the little pot's song. Wise folks. Once, in a small thatched cottage on the edge of a broad meadow, lived a peasant and his wife. The man was plain and strong, with a back bent from years of labor, and in his hand he carried a stout hazel stick that had served him in many quarrels with beasts and men alike. One morning, he stood by the door, tapping that stick upon the floor, and spoke sternly to his wife. "Trina, I must go across the country, and shall not return for 3 full days. While I am gone, keep your eyes open and your tongue sharper still. If the cattle dealer comes, and he may, and if he offers to buy our 3 cows, then you may strike a bargain. But remember this, not a single hoof shall leave the yard for less than 200 thalers. Do you hear me? 200, not 1 coin less. The woman folded her hands in her apron and said mildly, "Go in peace, husband. Heaven help me, I shall manage it well enough." But the peasant shook his head and muttered darkly, "You manage? Ha! When you were but a small child, you tumbled on your head, and the mischief of it has never left you. Mark my words, Trina. If you do aught foolish, I shall thrash you till your back is black and blue, and it will not be paint that colors you, but this stick in my hand, and the marks will last a year, you may depend on it." With that grim warning, he strode away down the road. The very next morning, the cattle dealer appeared, jingling his spurs and peering about with clever eyes. He saw the cows, he heard the price, and he nodded. 200 thalers? A fair bargain, madam. Indeed, they are worth it, and I shall not haggle. I will take them this very moment. He loosed their chains and drove them out. But just as he reached the gate, the peasant's wife seized him by the sleeve. "Nay, master dealer, the money first. Give me the 200 thalers now, or the cows stay where they are." "True enough," said he, smiting his forehead. "But, dear me, I have forgotten to buckle on my money belt this morning. Never fear, though. You shall have security. I will take but 2 cows, and leave 1 with you. That way you hold a pledge, and I shall return with the money soon enough." The woman nodded eagerly. "That is wisely spoken. Go then, and Hans will praise me for my cleverness. I have even kept the smallest cow, the one that eats least." And so she watched him drive away the best of the herd. On the 3rd day, the peasant came home. "Well then," he cried as soon as he entered, "are the cows sold?" "Yes, indeed, dear Hans," said Trina with a smile. 200 thalers, just as you commanded. The man did not so much as raise an objection. "And where is the money?" "Oh, the money. He had forgotten his belt, poor soul. But he will soon return, for he left good security behind." "What security?" "1 cow," said she proudly, "and I kept the smallest. Was that not cunning?" At this, Hans's face turned red as fire. He raised his stick high, meaning to keep his promise, and beat her soundly. Yet at the last moment, he let it fall, groaning aloud. "Woman, you are the greatest goose that ever waddled on God's earth. But listen well, I will not strike you this day. Instead, I shall walk the highways for 3 days. If in that time I find a soul more foolish than you, then you go free. If not, then prepare your back for the reward you have earned." So Hans went forth, seated himself upon a great stone by the roadside, and waited. Before long, he spied a cart rolling toward him, drawn by oxen, and a woman stood upright in the cart, swaying back and forth, though there was straw beside her to sit upon. "Here comes folly itself," thought Hans, and he leapt up, running before the cart like a madman. "What do you seek, good fellow?" called the woman. "I know you not. Whence come you?" "I have fallen straight from heaven," answered Hans solemnly. "And alas, I know not the way back. Could you perhaps drive me up again?" "No, indeed," said she, shaking her head. "But if you come from heaven, tell me of my husband. He has been there 3 years now. Surely you have seen him." Hans stroked his beard. "Aye, I saw him. He tends sheep, poor man, and the beasts give him endless trouble, for they scatter on the mountains and stray into the wilderness. He must run after them until his clothes are torn and ragged. Soon they will fall from his back altogether, and there are no tailors in heaven, for St. Peter will not admit any, as the story goes." The woman clasped her hands. "Alas, who would have thought it? Wait but a little, I will fetch his Sunday coat, which still hangs in the cupboard, so he may be decent again. You will take it to him, will you not?" Hans shook his head gravely. "Clothes may not pass the heavenly gate, good wife, but if you wish to help him, give me money. That may be hidden in my pocket." "Better still," she cried. "I sold wheat only yesterday, and have a purse full of coin. Sit you here, I shall fetch it straightway. And mark you, I stand in the cart, and not upon the straw, because it eases the oxen's load." Away she hurried, and soon returned with a heavy purse, which she pressed into Hans's hand, blessing him 1,000 times for his kindness. At home again, she told her son with joy how she had sent help to her poor husband in heaven. The youth was astonished. "Mother," said he, "such a chance comes not every day. I must see this man myself, for I would know what heaven is like." He saddled his horse and galloped off. Hans, who sat under a willow tree counting the coins, saw him come. "Good sir," cried the lad, "have you seen the man fallen from heaven?" "Yes," answered Hans. "He has already set out to climb back. He went up that hill yonder. If you ride quickly, you may catch him." "Alas," said the youth, weary from work, I am too tired. But you know him well. Be so good as to take my horse and call him back." Hans chuckled to himself. Another witless soul. Why should I not oblige? He mounted the horse, spurred it into a trot, and vanished. The youth sat waiting till the shadows grew long, but Hans never returned. At last he said, "No doubt the heavenly man was in haste, and took the horse to my father for his comfort." So he went home on foot and told his mother the tale. She nodded proudly. "Well done, my son. Thy father shall ride, while thou canst walk on younger legs." When Hans returned at last to his cottage, he put the horse in the stable beside the single cow. Then he entered, laid aside his stick, and said with a laugh, "Trina, fortune has smiled on you. I have found not one, but two, who are greater fools than you. This time you are spared a beating, though I may keep it in store for another day. And look here, we have gained a fat horse and a purse full of money in exchange for 2 lean cows. If folly always paid so richly, I should honor it as a trade worth keeping." And so he sat in his grandfather's chair, lit his pipe, and smoked in peace, while his wife looked on, still half proud of her own cleverness. But whether you prefer Hans's cunning or the simplicity of the foolish folk, well, that must be left to your own heart to decide. Stories about snakes. Once, long ago, there was a little child, tender of age, with hair like soft flax and cheeks as rosy as the dawn. Each afternoon, when the day had passed its hottest hour, and the shadows of the house stretched long upon the ground, the mother would bring forth for her little one a small earthen bowl. Into it she poured fresh milk, white and sweet, and crumbled in bread, warm and fragrant from the oven. Then she would set the bowl into the hands of her child, who would go and seat herself quietly in the yard, where the sun shone and the sparrows hopped to and fro. Now it so happened that when the child lifted her spoon and began to eat, a slender snake came creeping out of a crevice in the wall, smooth and glistening, with eyes that shone like drops of dew. The creature dipped its little head into the bowl and ate beside the child, sipping the milk with a quiet tongue. The child was not afraid, for she felt a strange delight in the companionship, as though a secret friend had come to share her meal. And when the little girl sat waiting with her dish and the snake delayed in coming, she would lift up her voice and sing in her childish tone, "Snake, snake, come swiftly, hither come, thou tiny thing. Thou shalt have thy crumbs of bread. Thou shalt refresh thyself with milk." At these words, the snake always came in haste, gliding with gentle speed, and it would drink long and gratefully. Nor was it unthankful, for each time it brought with it some gift from its hidden treasures, bright stones that sparkled like the rainbow, little pearls that gleamed like frozen tears, and golden playthings wrought as delicately as the work of fairies. The child laughed to see these wonders and prized them as her dearest toys. But the snake, though it drank deeply of the milk, never once touched the breadcrumbs. One day, when the sun shone kindly and the child was merry of heart, she took her little spoon and, striking the snake gently upon its head, said, "Eat the bread crumbs as well, little thing, for they are good." Now the mother was standing in the kitchen, and through the open door she heard the child speaking words to one unseen. Wondering, she came forth, and behold, she saw her darling with the snake, striking it lightly with her spoon. At this, her heart was seized with fear, and she thought only of harm. She snatched a log of wood from beside the hearth, ran out in haste, and with one blow killed the gentle creature. From that hour forth, a change came over the child. So long as the snake had eaten with her, she had thriven like a young tree in springtime. Her limbs had grown strong. Her cheeks glowed with rosy health, and her eyes shone bright. But now the bloom faded. Day by day, she grew paler, weaker, and thinner, until she wasted like a candle that burns low. It was not long before, in the silence of the night, the funeral bird raised its mournful cry, and the redbreast gathered little twigs and leaves to weave a garland for the dead. Soon after, the child lay upon her bier, and the house was filled with sorrow. The second tale. There was once an orphan child, poor and lonely, who earned her bread by spinning flax upon the town walls. One quiet afternoon, as she turned her wheel and the threads slipped through her fingers, she spied a snake gliding out from a hole low in the stones. The creature shone in the sunlight and moved with silent grace. The maiden, who had heard old tales of the ways of serpents, swiftly spread out beside the hole one of her blue silk kerchiefs. For it is well known that snakes take delight in such cloth, and will creep only upon it, as though enchanted by its sheen. As soon as the snake beheld the silken square, it paused, turned back into the darkness, and after a short while returned. In its mouth it bore a tiny golden crown, wrought with the finest filigree, delicate as spider's lace. The snake laid this treasure upon the kerchief, and then slipped away again into its stony passage. The girl lifted the crown and it glittered with a fair light in her hand. She marveled at it, for never had she seen such fine work. It seemed as though it must belong to a king among serpents, or perhaps to some hidden treasure of the earth itself. Not long after, the snake returned a second time. But when it came and saw that the crown was gone, it raised itself upon the wall. Then, filled with grief, it smote its little head again and again upon the hard stone until it could no longer stir, and at last lay there lifeless. And thus was the treasure lost to both. For if the maiden had but left the crown upon the kerchief, the serpent, in gratitude, would surely have brought forth still greater wonders from its hidden hoard. The third tale. There was once a snake that cried aloud in a sorrowful voice, "Hoo hoo 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 hoo, hoo 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 hoo." A little child, hearing the sound, called out, "Come out, come out." So the snake crept forth. The child, looking at it, asked, "Hast thou perchance seen my little sister, she who is called Red Stockings?" The snake answered, "No." "Neither have I," said the child. "Then I am like you," replied the snake. And again it cried, "Hoo hoo 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 hoo," until its voice faded into silence. The poor miller's boy and the cat, in a quiet valley by the bend of a restless stream, there stood a weathered mill of gray stone. Within its walls lived an aged miller, a man who had seen many summers and winters pass over his head, yet who had never known wife nor child to inherit his work. Instead, 3 apprentices served beneath him, and for many years they turned the heavy wheels, ground the corn, and bore the burdens of the house. At length the miller, grown stiff in his limbs and weary of toil, spoke thus to his lads, "Children, I am old, and the day comes when I would rather rest by the chimney than carry sacks to the loft. One of you must take my mill, yet he who shall have it must also promise to care for me in my declining days. To decide the matter fairly, go out into the wide world. Whosoever brings back to me the finest horse, to him will I give the mill, and in return he shall keep me till death calls me." Now among the 3 was the youngest, Hans, who was at the drudge of the house. The others scornfully called him Stupid Hans, for he was slow of tongue and simple in manner. They grudged him any good fortune, and least of all the mill. Still, the 3 set forth together. When they came to the village, the elder 2 mocked Hans cruelly. "Best stay behind, Hans," said they, "for while thou livest, thou wilt never win a horse. Better sit upon the fence and watch us ride home in triumph." But Hans followed silently, bearing their jests. Evening drew on, and the travelers found a dark cavern where they laid themselves down to sleep. When Hans had sunk into slumber, the two wicked fellows rose, stole softly away, and left him alone in the cold hollow. They fancied themselves clever, yet ill fortune was already weaving a net about them. At dawn, Hans awoke. He rubbed his eyes, looked about at the high rock walls, and sighed. Alas, heavens above, where am I, and how shall I find a horse here? Climbing with effort out of the cavern, he wandered into the deep forest. His heart was heavy, for all seemed lost. As he walked, pondering, a small tabby cat crossed his path. She gazed at him with bright eyes and spoke gently. Hans, whither goest thou? Hans marveled, saying, What? A cat that speaks? Yet little good thou canst do me. The cat replied, I know thy wish. Thou wouldst gain a horse, fairer than any thou hast ever beheld. Come with me, serve me faithfully for 7 years, and thy reward shall be such a horse as shines brighter than the sun upon a clear day. Hans thought to himself, This is wondrous strange, yet I shall see if truth lies in her words. So he followed the little cat. She led him to a castle unlike any he had seen before, where the halls rang not with human voices, but with the patter and mewing of countless cats. They were her servants, and they leapt upstairs and down, swift and merry, their tails high like banners. In the evening, when supper was laid, 3 cats brought forth instruments and made music. One puffed mightily upon a trumpet, cheeks round as apples. Another fiddled with great diligence, and the third droned upon a bassoon. Hans laughed to see it, yet the cats were well pleased. When the table was cleared, the tabby cat said, Now, Hans, dance with me. But Hans shook his head. I will not dance with a cat. Never yet have I done such a thing. Then take him to bed, said she. So her servants lit him to his chamber. One drew off his shoes, another his stockings, a third pulled the coverlet, and the last leapt to the candle and puffed it out. Morning came, and again the cats waited upon him. One brought stockings, another shoes, another washed him, and one even dried his face with her soft tail. That feels gentle indeed, thought Hans. Yet he must labor. The cat set him to chop wood, and gave him an axe of silver, a wedge and saw of silver, and a mallet of copper. He worked faithfully, and though he wondered each day when his horse should come, he spoke not. At another time, she bade him mow her meadow. She gave him a scythe of silver and a whetstone of gold. commanding him to return them carefully. Hans mowed the grass, dried it, and carried it home. Still, he asked, "Mistress Cat, is it time for my reward?" "Not yet," said she. "First, build me a small house. Here are tools, all of silver, axe, plane, and square. Use them well." So Hans built the little house, and when it was done, years had passed, as though they were but months. 7 years slipped by like half a year's dream. Then at last the cat said, "Hans, thou hast served me well. Wouldst thou see my horses?" She led him to the little house, opened the door, and behold, 12 horses stood within, their coats bright as polished glass, their manes flowing like golden silk. Hans's heart leapt at the sight. The cat gave him food and drink and said, "Now go home. Thy horse I will bring to thee in 3 days' time." So Hans returned to the mill. Yet in all those years, no new garment had he been given. He still wore the old smock frock, now too small and tattered. The other apprentices were already come back, each leading a horse, one blind, the other lame. They mocked Hans, asking, "Where is thine?" "It will follow in 3 days," said he. They laughed the louder. The miller, ashamed of Hans's rags, bade him eat outside, not at the table. At night, the others denied him a bed, so he crept into the goose house and lay upon hard straw. On the 3rd morning, rumbling wheels were heard. A splendid coach came, drawn by 6 shining horses, and behind was led a 7th, fairer than any steed the miller had ever seen. From the coach stepped a noble princess, arrayed in jewels, and lo, she was none other than the little tabby cat. "Where is the miller's boy? The drudge?" she asked. "In the goose house," answered the miller, "for he is too ragged to sit within." But the princess commanded, and Hans was brought forth, holding his torn frock together for shame. The servants washed him, dressed him in garments rich as a king's, and he shone more handsome than either of his fellows. The princess looked at the other apprentices' wretched beasts, then pointed to the 7th horse. "This belongs to Hans, thy faithful boy," said she. The miller, astonished, declared, "Then Hans must have the mill as I promised." But the princess replied, "The horse is his, yet let him keep the mill also, for he shall dwell not here, but with me." So she set Hans beside her in the coach, and they drove first to the little house he had built. Lo, it had become a shining castle, its halls filled with silver and gold. There she made him her husband, and together they lived in great riches and honor. And from that time forth, None dared say that a simple or foolish lad might not rise to greatness, if only he prove faithful and true. The two travelers, hill and vale, do not come together, but the children of men do, good and bad. In this way, a shoemaker and a tailor once met with each other in their travels. The tailor was a handsome little fellow who was always merry and full of enjoyment. He saw the shoemaker coming towards him from the other side, and as he observed by his bag what kind of a trade he plied, he sang a little mocking song to him. Sew me the seam, draw me the thread, spread it over with pitch, knock the nail on the head. The shoemaker, however, could not endure a joke. He pulled a face as if he had drunk vinegar, and made a gesture as if he were about to seize the tailor by the throat. But the little fellow began to laugh, reached him his bottle, and said, "No harm was meant. Take a drink, and swallow your anger down." The shoemaker took a very hearty drink, and the storm on his face began to clear away. He gave the bottle back to the tailor and said, "I spoke civilly to you. One speaks well after much drinking, but not after much thirst. Shall we travel together?" "All right," answered the tailor. "If only it suits you to go into a big town where there is no lack of work." "That is just where I want to go," answered the shoemaker. "In a small nest there is nothing to earn, and in the country people like to go barefoot." They traveled therefore onwards together, and always set one foot before the other, like a weasel in the snow. Both of them had time enough, but little to bite and to break. When they reached a town, they went about and paid their respects to the tradesmen. And because the tailor looked so lively and merry, and had such pretty red cheeks, everyone gave him work willingly. And when luck was good, the master's daughters gave him a kiss beneath the porch as well. When he again fell in with the shoemaker, the tailor had always the most in his bundle. The ill-tempered shoemaker made a wry face and thought, "The greater the rascal, the more the luck." But the tailor began to laugh and to sing, and shared he got with his comrade. If a couple of pence jingled in his pockets, he ordered good cheer, and thumped the table in his joy till the glasses danced. And it was lightly come, lightly go, with him. When they had traveled for some time, they came to a great forest through which passed the road to the capital. 2 footpaths, however, led through it, one of which was a 7 days' journey, and the other only 2. But neither of the travelers knew which way was the short one. They seated themselves beneath an oak tree and took counsel together how they should forecast, and for how many days they should provide themselves with bread. The shoemaker said, "One must look before one leaps. I will take with me bread for a week." "What?" said the tailor. "Drag bread for 7 days on one's back like a beast of burden, and not be able to look about. I shall trust in God, and not trouble myself about anything. The money I have in my pocket is as good in summer as in winter, but in hot weather bread gets dry, and moldy into the bargain. Even my coat does not go as far as it might. Besides, why should we not find the right way? Bread for 2 days, and that's enough." Each, therefore, bought his own bread, and then they tried their luck in the forest. It was as quiet there as in a church. No wind stirred, no brook murmured, no bird sang, and through the thickly leaved branches no sunbeam forced its way. The shoemaker spoke never a word. The heavy bread weighed down his back until the perspiration streamed down his cross and gloomy face. The tailor, however, was quite merry. He jumped about, whistled on a leaf, or sang a song, and thought to himself, "God in heaven must be pleased to see me so happy." This lasted 2 days, but on the 3rd, the forest would not come to an end, and the tailor had eaten up all his bread. So after all, his heart sank down a yard deeper. In the meantime, he did not lose courage, but relied on God and on his luck. On the 3rd day, he lay down in the evening, hungry under a tree, and rose again next morning, hungry still. So also passed the 4th day, and when the shoemaker seated himself on a fallen tree and devoured his dinner, the tailor was only a looker-on. If he begged for a little piece of bread, the other laughed mockingly and said, "Thou hast always been so merry. Now thou canst try for once what it is to be sad. The birds which sing too early in the morning are struck by the hawk in the evening." In short, he was pitiless. But on the 5th morning, the poor tailor could no longer stand up, and was hardly able to utter one word for weakness. His cheeks were white, and his eyes red. Then the shoemaker said to him, "I will give thee a bit of bread today, but in return for it, I will put out thy right eye." The unhappy tailor, who still wished to save his life, could not do it in any other way. He wept once more with both eyes, and then held them out. And the shoemaker, who had a heart of stone, put out his right eye with a sharp knife. The tailor called to remembrance what his mother had formerly said to him when he had been eating secretly in the pantry. "Eat what one can, and suffer what one must." When he had consumed his dearly bought bread, he got on his legs again, forgot his misery, and comforted himself with the thought that he could always see enough with one eye. But on the 6th day, hunger made itself felt again, and gnawed him almost to the heart. In the evening, he fell down by a tree, and on the 7th morning he could not raise himself up for faintness, and death was close at hand. Then said the shoemaker, I will show mercy, and give thee bread once more, but thou shalt not have it for nothing. I shall put out thy other eye for it. And now the tailor felt how thoughtless his life had been, prayed to God for forgiveness, and said, Do what thou wilt. I will bear what I must. But remember that our Lord God does not always look on passively, and that an hour will come when the evil deed which thou hast done to me, and which I have not deserved of thee, will be requited. When times were good with me, I shared what I had with thee. My trade is of that kind that each stitch must always be exactly like the other. If I no longer have my eyes, and can sew no more, I must go a-begging. At any rate, do not leave me here alone when I am blind, or I shall die of hunger. The shoemaker, however, who had driven God out of his heart, took the knife and put out his left eye. Then he gave him a bit of bread to eat, held out a stick to him, and drew him on behind him. When the sun went down, they got out of the forest, and before them in the open country stood the gallows. Thither the shoemaker guided the blind tailor, and then left him alone and went his way. Weariness, pain, and hunger made the wretched man fall asleep, and he slept the whole night. When day dawned, he awoke, but knew not where he lay. 2 poor sinners were hanging on the gallows, and a crow sat on the head of each of them. Then one of the men who had been hanged began to speak, and said, Brother, art thou awake? Yes, I am awake, answered the second. Then I will tell thee something, said the first. The dew which this night has fallen down over us from the gallows gives everyone who washes himself with it his eyes again. If blind people did but know this, how many would regain their sight who do not believe that to be possible? When the tailor heard that, he took his pocket handkerchief, pressed it on the grass, and when it was moist with dew, washed the sockets of his eyes with it. Immediately was fulfilled what the man on the gallows had said, and a couple of healthy new eyes filled the sockets. It was not long before the tailor saw the sun rise behind the mountains. In the plain before him lay the great royal city with its magnificent gates and 100 towers, and the golden balls and crosses which were on the spires began to shine. He could distinguish every leaf on the trees, saw the birds which flew past, and the midges which danced in the air. He took a needle out of his pocket, and as he could thread it as well as ever he had done, his heart danced with delight. He threw himself on his knees, thanked God for the mercy he had shown him, and said his morning prayer. He did not forget also to pray for the poor sinners who were hanging there, swinging against each other in the wind like the pendulums of clocks. Then he took his bundle on his back and soon forgot the pain of heart he had endured, and went on his way singing and whistling. The first thing he met was a brown foal running about the fields at large. He caught it by the mane and wanted to spring on it and ride into the town. The foal, however, begged to be set free. "I am still too young," it said. "Even a light tailor such as thou art would break my back in two. Let me go till I have grown strong. A time may perhaps come when I may reward thee for it." "Run off," said the tailor. "I see thou art still a giddy thing." He gave it a touch with a switch over its back, whereupon it kicked up its hind legs for joy, leapt over hedges and ditches, and galloped away into the open country. But the little tailor had eaten nothing since the day before. "The sun, to be sure, fills my eyes," said he, "but the bread does not fill my mouth. The first thing that comes across me and is even half edible will have to suffer for it." In the meantime, a stork stepped solemnly over the meadow towards him. "Halt! Halt!" cried the tailor, and seized him by the leg. "I don't know if thou art good to eat or not, but my hunger leaves me no great choice. I must cut thy head off and roast thee." "Don't do that," replied the stork. "I am a sacred bird which brings mankind great profit, and no one does me an injury. Leave me my life, and I may do thee good in some other way." "Well, be off, cousin Longlegs," said the tailor. The stork rose up, let its long legs hang down, and flew gently away. "What's to be the end of this?" said the tailor to himself at last. "My hunger grows greater and greater, and my stomach more and more empty. Whatsoever comes in my way now is lost." At this moment, he saw a couple of young ducks which were on a pond come swimming towards him. "You come just at the right moment," said he, and laid hold of one of them, and was about to wring its neck. On this, an old duck, which was hidden among the reeds, began to scream loudly, and swam to him with open beak, and begged him urgently to spare her dear children. "Canst thou not imagine," said she, "how thy mother would mourn if anyone wanted to carry thee off, and give thee thy finishing stroke?" "Only be quiet," said the good-tempered tailor. "Thou shalt keep thy children," and put the prisoner back into the water. When he turned round, he was standing in front of an old tree, which was partly hollow, and saw some wild bees flying in and out of it. There I shall at once find the reward of my good deed, said the tailor. The honey will refresh me. But the queen bee came out, threatened him, and said, If thou touchest my people and destroyest my nest, our stings shall pierce thy skin like 10,000 red-hot needles. But if thou wilt leave us in peace and go thy way, we will do thee a service for it another time. The little tailor saw that here also nothing was to be done. 3 dishes empty, and nothing on the 4th, is a bad dinner. He dragged himself, therefore, with his starved-out stomach into the town, and as it was just striking 12, was ready cooked for him in the inn, and he was able to sit down at once to dinner. When he was satisfied, he said, Now I will get to work. He went round the town, sought a master, and soon found a good situation, as, however, he had thoroughly learnt his trade. It was not long before he became famous, and everyone wanted to have his new coat made by the little tailor, whose importance increased daily. I can go no further in skill, said he, and yet things improve every day. At last the king appointed him court tailor. But how things do happen in the world! On the very same day, his former comrade, the shoemaker, also became court shoemaker. When the latter caught sight of the tailor and saw that he had once more 2 healthy eyes, his conscience troubled him. Before he takes revenge on me, thought he to himself, I must dig a pit for him. He, however, who digs a pit for another, falls into it himself. In the evening, when work was over, and it had grown dusk, he stole to the king and said, Lord King, the tailor is an arrogant fellow, and has boasted that he will get the gold crown back again, which was lost in ancient times. That would please me very much, said the king. And he caused the tailor to be brought before him next morning, and ordered him to get the crown back again, or to leave the town forever. Oh, thought the tailor, a rogue gives more than he has got. If the surly king wants me to do what can be done by no one, I will not wait till morning, but will go out of the town at once today. He packed up his bundle, therefore, but when he was without the gate, he could not help being sorry to give up his good fortune and turn his back on the town in which all had gone so well with him. He came to the pond where he had made the acquaintance of the ducks. At that very moment, the old one whose young ones he had spared was sitting there by the shore, pluming herself with her beak. She knew him again instantly, and asked why he was hanging his head so. Thou wilt not be surprised when thou hearest what has befallen me, replied the tailor, and told her his fate. If that be all, said the duck. "We can help thee." The crown fell into the water and lies down below at the bottom. We will soon bring it up again for thee. In the meantime, just spread out thy handkerchief on the bank. She dived down with her 12 young ones, and in 5 minutes she was up again, and sat with the crown resting on her wings. And the 12 young ones were swimming round about, and had put their beaks under it, and were helping to carry it. They swam to the shore, and put the crown on the handkerchief. No one can imagine how magnificent the crown was. When the sun shone on it, it gleamed like 100,000 carbuncles. The tailor tied his handkerchief together by the 4 corners and carried it to the king, who was full of joy, and put a gold chain round the tailor's neck. When the shoemaker saw that one stroke had failed, he contrived a second, and went to the king and said, "Lord King, the tailor has become insolent again. He boasts that he will copy in wax the whole of the royal palace, with everything that pertains to it, loose or fast, inside and out." The king sent for the tailor and ordered him to copy in wax the whole of the royal palace, with everything that pertained to it, movable or immovable, within and without. And if he did not succeed in doing this, or if so much as one nail on the wall were wanting, he should be imprisoned for his whole life underground. The tailor thought, "It gets worse and worse. No one can endure that," and threw his bundle on his back and went forth. When he came to the hollow tree, he sat down and hung his head. The bees came flying out, and the queen bee asked him if he had a stiff neck, since he held his head so awry. "Alas, no," answered the tailor. "Something quite different weighs me down." And he told her what the king had demanded of him. The bees began to buzz and hum amongst themselves, and the queen bee said, "Just go home again, but come back tomorrow at this time, and bring a large sheet with you, and then all will be well." So he turned back again, but the bees flew to the royal palace and straight into it, through the open windows, crept round about into every corner, and inspected everything most carefully. Then they hurried back and modeled the palace in wax with such rapidity that anyone looking on would have thought it was growing before his eyes. By the evening, all was ready, and when the tailor came next morning, the whole of the splendid building was there, and not one nail in the wall or tile of the roof was wanting. And it was delicate withal, and white as snow, and smelt sweet as honey. The tailor wrapped it carefully in his cloth and took it to the king, who could not admire it enough, placed it in his largest hall, and in return for it, presented the tailor with a large stone house. The shoemaker, however, did not give up, but went for the third time to the king and said, "Lord King, it has come to the tailor's ears that no water will spring up in the courtyard of the castle, and he has boasted that it shall rise up in the midst of the courtyard to a man's height and be clear as crystal." Then the king ordered the tailor to be brought before him and said, "If a stream of water does not rise in my courtyard by tomorrow, as thou hast promised, the executioner shall in that very place make thee shorter by the head." The poor tailor did not take long to think about it, but hurried out to the gate. And because this time it was a matter of life and death to him, tears rolled down his face. Whilst he was thus going forth full of sorrow, the foal to which he had formerly given its liberty, and which had now become a beautiful chestnut horse, came leaping towards him. "The time has come," it said to the tailor, "when I can repay thee for thy good deed. I know already what is needful to thee, but thou shalt soon have help. Get on me, my back can carry two such as thou." The tailor's courage came back to him. He jumped up in one bound, and the horse went full speed into the town and right up to the courtyard of the castle. It galloped as quick as lightning thrice round it, and at the third time it fell violently down. At the same instant, however, there was a terrific clap of thunder. A fragment of earth in the middle of the courtyard sprang like a cannonball into the air, and over the castle, and directly after it, a jet of water rose as high as a man on horseback, and the water was as pure as crystal, and the sunbeams began to dance on it. When the king saw that, he arose in amazement, and went and embraced the tailor in the sight of all men. But good fortune did not last long. The king had daughters in plenty, one still prettier than the other, but he had no son, so the malicious shoemaker betook himself for the fourth time to the king, and said, "Lord King, the tailor has not given up his arrogance. He has now boasted that if he liked, he could cause a son to be brought to the Lord King through the air." The king commanded the tailor to be summoned, and said, "If thou causest a son to be brought to me within 9 days, thou shalt have my eldest daughter to wife." "The reward is indeed great," thought the little tailor. "One would willingly do something for it. But the cherries grow too high for me. If I climb for them, the bough will break beneath me, and I shall fall." He went home, seated himself cross-legged on his work table, and thought over what was to be done. "It can't be managed," cried he at last. "I will go away. After all, I can't live in peace here." He tied up his bundle and hurried away to the gate. When he got to the meadow, he perceived his old friend, the stork, who was walking backwards and forwards like a philosopher. Sometimes he stood still, took a frog into close consideration, and at length swallowed it down. The stork came to him and greeted him. "I see," he began, "that thou hast thy pack on thy back. Why art thou leaving the town?" The tailor told him what the king had required of him, and how he could not perform it, and lamented his misfortune. "Don't let thy hair grow gray about that," said the stork. "I will help thee out of thy difficulty. For a long time now, I have carried the children in swaddling clothes into the town, so for once in a way, I can fetch a little prince out of the well. Go home and be easy. In 9 days from this time, repair to the royal palace, and there will I come." The little tailor went home, and at the appointed time was at the castle. It was not long before the stork came flying thither and tapped at the window. The tailor opened it, and Cousin Longlegs came carefully in and walked with solemn steps over the smooth marble pavement. He had, moreover, a baby in his beak that was as lovely as an angel, and stretched out its little hands to the queen. The stork laid it in her lap, and she caressed it and kissed it, and was beside herself with delight. Before the stork flew away, he took his traveling bag off his back and handed it over to the queen. In it, there were little paper parcels with colored sweetmeats, and they were divided amongst the little princesses. The eldest, however, had none of them, but got the merry tailor for a husband. "It seems to me," said he, "just as if I had won the highest prize. My mother was right, after all. She always said that whoever trusts in God and only has good luck can never fail." The shoemaker had to make the shoes in which the little tailor danced at the wedding festival, after which he was commanded to quit the town forever. The road to the forest led him to the gallows. Worn out with anger, rage, and the heat of the day, he threw himself down when he had closed his eyes and was about to sleep. The 2 crows flew down from the heads of the men who were hanging there and pecked his eyes out. In his madness, he ran into the forest and must have died there of hunger, for no one has ever either seen him again or heard of him. Hans My Hedgehog. There was once a countryman who had money and land in plenty. But how rich soever he was, one thing was still wanting in his happiness. He had no children. Often, when he went into the town with the other peasants, they mocked him and asked why he had no children. At last, he became angry, and when he got home, he said, "I will have a child, even if it be a hedgehog." Then his wife had a child. That was a hedgehog in the upper part of his body, and a boy in the lower. And when she saw the child, she was terrified, and said, "See, there thou hast brought ill luck on us." Then said the man, What can be done now? The boy must be christened, but we shall not be able to get a godfather for him." The woman said, "And we cannot call him anything else but Hans My Hedgehog." When he was christened, the parson said, "He cannot go into any ordinary bed because of his spikes." So a little straw was put behind the stove, and Hans My Hedgehog was laid on it. His mother could not suckle him, for he would have pricked her with his quills. So he lay there behind the stove for 8 years. And his father was tired of him and thought, if he would but die. He did not die, however, but remained lying there. Now it happened that there was a fair in the town, and the peasant was about to go to it, and asked his wife what he should bring back with him for her. "A little meat and a couple of white rolls, which are wanted for the house," said she. Then he asked the servant, and she wanted a pair of slippers and some stockings with clocks. At last he said also, "And what wilt thou have, Hans My Hedgehog?" "Dear father," he said, "do bring me bagpipes." When, therefore, the father came home again, he gave his wife what he had bought for her, meat and white rolls, and then he gave the maid the slippers and the stockings with clocks. And lastly, he went behind the stove and gave Hans My Hedgehog the bagpipes. And when Hans My Hedgehog had the bagpipes, he said, "Dear father, do go to the forge and get the cockshod, and then I will ride away and never come back again." On this, the father was delighted to think that he was going to get rid of him, and had the cock shod for him. And when it was done, Hans My Hedgehog got on it and rode away, but took swine and asses with him, which he intended to keep in the forest. When they got there, he made the cock fly on to a high tree with him, and there he sat for many a long year, and watched his asses and swine until the herd was quite large, and his father knew nothing about him. While he was sitting in the tree, however, he played his bagpipes and made music, which was very beautiful. Once, a king came traveling by who had lost his way and heard the music. He was astonished at it, and sent his servant forth to look all round and see from whence this music came. He spied about, but saw nothing but a little animal sitting up aloft on the tree, which looked like a cock with a hedgehog on it, which made this music. Then the king told the servant he was to ask why he sat there, and if he knew the road which led to his kingdom. So Hans My Hedgehog descended from the tree, and said he would show the way if the king would write a bond and promise him whatever he first met in the royal courtyard as soon as he arrived at home. Then the king thought, "I can easily do that. Hans My Hedgehog understands nothing, and I can write what I like." So the king took pen and ink and wrote something, and when he had done it, Hans my Hedgehog showed him the way, and he got safely home. But his daughter, when she saw him from afar, was so overjoyed that she ran to meet him and kissed him. Then he remembered Hans my Hedgehog and told her what had happened, and that he had been forced to promise whatsoever first met him when he got home to a very strange animal, which sat on a cock as if it were a horse, and made beautiful music, but that instead of writing that he should have what he wanted, he had written that he should not have it. Thereupon the princess was glad, and said he had done well, for she never would have gone away with the hedgehog. Hans my Hedgehog, however, looked after his asses and pigs, and was always merry, and sat on the tree, and played his bagpipes. Now it came to pass that another king came journeying by with his attendants and runners, and he also had lost his way, and did not know how to get home again, because the forest was so large. He likewise heard the beautiful music from a distance, and asked his runner what that could be, and told him to go and see. Then the runner went under the tree, and saw the cock sitting at the top of it, and Hans my Hedgehog on the cock. The runner asked him what he was about up there. "I am keeping my asses and my pigs, but what is your desire?" The messenger said that they had lost their way, and could not get back into their own kingdom, and asked if he would not show them the way. Then Hans my Hedgehog got down the tree with the cock, and told the aged king that he would show him the way, if he would give him for his own whatsoever first met him in front of his royal palace. The king said, "Yes," and wrote a promise to Hans my Hedgehog that he should have this. That done, Hans rode on before him on the cock, and pointed out the way, and the king reached his kingdom again in safety. When he got to the courtyard, there were great rejoicings. Now he had an only daughter who was very beautiful. She ran to meet him, threw her arms round his neck, and was delighted to have her old father back again. She asked him where in the world he had been so long. So he told her how he had lost his way, and had very nearly not come back at all, but that as he was traveling through a great forest, a creature, half hedgehog, half man, who was sitting astride a cock in a high tree and making music, had shown him the way and helped him to get out, but that in return he had promised him whatsoever first met him in the royal courtyard, and how that was she herself, which made him unhappy now. But on this she promised that, for love of her father, she would willingly go with this Hans if he came. Hans My Hedgehog, however, took care of his pigs, and the pigs multiplied until they became so many in number that the whole forest was filled with them. Then Hans My Hedgehog resolved not to live in the forest any longer, and sent word to his father to have every sty in the village emptied. For he was coming with such a great herd that all might kill who wished to do so. When his father heard that, he was troubled, for he thought Hans My Hedgehog had died long ago. Hans My Hedgehog, however, seated himself on the cock and drove the pigs before him into the village and ordered the slaughter to begin. Ha! But there was a killing and a chopping that might have been heard 2 miles off. After this, Hans My Hedgehog said, "Father, let me have the cock shod once more at the forge, and then I will ride away and never come back as long as I live." Then the father had the cock shod once more, and was pleased that Hans My Hedgehog would never return again. Hans My Hedgehog rode away to the first kingdom. There, the king had commanded that whosoever came, mounted on a cock, and had bagpipes with him, should be shot at, cut down, or stabbed by everyone, so that he might not enter the palace. When, therefore, Hans My Hedgehog came riding thither, they all pressed forward against him with their pikes. But he spurred the cock, and it flew up over the gate in front of the king's window, and lighted there. And Hans cried that the king must give him what he had promised, or he would take both his life and his daughter's. Then the king began to speak his daughter fair, and to beg her to go away with Hans in order to save her own life and her father's. So she dressed herself in white, and her father gave her a carriage with 6 horses and magnificent attendants, together with gold and possessions. She seated herself in the carriage and placed Hans My Hedgehog beside her with the cock and the bagpipes. And then they took leave and drove away, and the king thought he should never see her again. He was, however, deceived in his expectation, for when they were at a short distance from the town, Hans My Hedgehog took her pretty clothes off and pierced her with his hedgehog skin until she bled all over. "That is the reward of your falseness," said he. "Go your way. I will not have you." And on that, he chased her home again, and she was disgraced for the rest of her life. Hans My Hedgehog, however, rode on further on the cock with his bagpipes to the dominions of the second king, to whom he had shown the way. This one, however, had arranged that if anyone resembling Hans My Hedgehog should come, they were to present arms, give him safe conduct, cry long life to him, and lead him to the royal palace. But when the king's daughter saw him, she was terrified, for he looked quite too strange. She remembered, however, that she could not change her mind, for she had given her promise to her father. So Hans My Hedgehog was welcomed by her and married to her, and had to go with her to the royal table. And she seated herself by his side, and they ate and drank. When the evening came and they wanted to go to sleep, she was afraid of his quills. But he told her she was not to fear, for no harm would befall her. And he told the old king that he was to appoint 4 men to watch by the door of the chamber and light a great fire. And when he entered the room and was about to get into bed, he would creep out of his hedgehog's skin and leave it lying there by the bedside, and that the men were to run nimbly to it, throw it in the fire, and stay by it until it was consumed. When the clock struck 11, he went into the chamber, stripped off the hedgehog's skin, and left it lying by the bed. Then came the men, and fetched it swiftly, and threw it in the fire. And when the fire had consumed it, he was delivered, and lay there in bed in human form. But he was coal black, as if he had been burnt. The king sent for his physician, who washed him with precious salves, and anointed him. And he became white, and was a handsome young man. When the king's daughter saw that she was glad, and the next morning they arose joyfully, ate and drank. And then the marriage was properly solemnized. And Hans My Hedgehog received the kingdom from the aged king. When several years had passed, he went with his wife to his father, and said that he was his son. The father, however, declared he had no son, he had never had but one, and he had been born like a hedgehog with spikes, and had gone forth into the world. Then Hans made himself known, and the old father rejoiced, and went with him to his kingdom. The Jew Among Thorns. There was once a rich man who had a servant who served him diligently and honestly. He was every morning the first out of bed, and the last to go to rest at night. And whenever there was a difficult job to be done, which nobody cared to undertake, he was always the first to set himself to it. Moreover, he never complained, but was contented with everything, and always merry. When a year was ended, his master gave him no wages, for he said to himself, "That is the cleverest way, for I shall save something, and he will not go away, but stay quietly in my service." The servant said nothing, but did his work the second year as he had done it the first. And when at the end of this, likewise, he received no wages, he made himself happy, and still stayed on. When the third year also was past, the master considered, put his hand in his pocket, but pulled nothing out. Then, at last, the servant said, "Master, for 3 years I have served you honestly. Be so good as to give me what I ought to have, for I wish to leave and look about me a little more in the world." "Yes, my good fellow," answered the old miser. "You have served me industriously, and therefore you shall be cheerfully rewarded." And he put his hand into his pocket, but counted out only 3 farthings, saying, "There, you have a farthing for each year. That is large and liberal pay, such as you would have received from few masters." The honest servant, who understood little about money, put his fortune into his pocket and thought, "Ah, now that I have my purse full, why need I trouble and plague myself any longer with hard work?" So on he went, up hill and down dale, and sang and jumped to his heart's content. Now it came to pass that as he was going by a thicket, a little man stepped out and called to him, "Whither away, merry brother? I see you do not carry many cares." "Why should I be sad?" answered the servant. "I have enough. 3 years' wages are jingling in my pocket." "How much is your treasure?" the dwarf asked him. "How much?" "3 farthings sterling, all told." "Look here," said the dwarf. "I am a poor, needy man. Give me your 3 farthings. I can work no longer, but you are young and can easily earn your bread." And as the servant had a good heart and felt pity for the old man, he gave him the 3 farthings, saying, "Take them in the name of heaven. I shall not be any the worse for it." Then the little man said, "As I see you have a good heart, I grant you 3 wishes, 1 for each farthing. They shall all be fulfilled." "Aha," said the servant. "You are one of those who can work wonders. Well, then, if it is to be so, I wish, first, for a gun, which shall hit everything that I aim at. Secondly, for a fiddle, which when I play on it, shall compel all who hear it to dance. Thirdly, that if I ask a favor of anyone, he shall not be able to refuse it." "All that shall you have," said the dwarf, and put his hand into the bush, and only think, there lay a fiddle and gun, all ready, just as if they had been ordered. These he gave to the servant, and then said to him, "Whatever you may ask at any time, no man in the world shall be able to deny you." "Heart alive, what can one desire more?" said the servant to himself, and went merrily onwards. Soon afterwards, he met a Jew with a long goat's beard, who was standing, listening to the song of a bird, which was sitting up at the top of a tree. "Good heavens," he was exclaiming, "that such a small creature should have such a fearfully loud voice. If it were but mine, if only someone would sprinkle some salt upon its tail." "And if that is all," said the servant, "the bird shall soon be down here." And taking aim, he pulled the trigger, and down fell the bird into the thorn bushes. "Go, you rogue," he said to the Jew, "and fetch the bird out for yourself." "Oh," said the Jew, "leave out the rogue, my master, and I will do it at once. I will get the bird out for myself, as you really have hit it." Then he lay down on the ground and began to crawl into the thicket. When he was fast among the thorns, the good servant's humor so tempted him that he took up his fiddle and began to play. In a moment, the Jew's legs began to move and to jump into the air. And the more the servant fiddled, the better went the dance. But the thorns tore his shabby coat from him, combed his beard, and pricked and plucked him all over the body. "Oh dear," cried the Jew, "what do I want with your fiddling? Leave the fiddle alone, master. I do not want to dance." But the servant did not listen to him, and thought, "You have fleeced people often enough. Now the thorn bushes shall do the same to you." And he began to play over again, so that the Jew had to jump higher than ever, and scraps of his coat were left hanging on the thorns. "Oh, woe's me!" cried the Jew. "I will give the gentleman whatsoever he asks, if only he leaves off fiddling a purse full of gold." "If you are so liberal," said the servant, "I will stop my music. But this I must say to your credit, that you dance to it so well that it is quite an art." And having taken the purse, he went his way. The Jew stood still and watched the servant quietly until he was far off and out of sight. And then he screamed out with all his might, "You miserable musician, you beer-house fiddler! Wait till I catch you alone. I will hunt you till the soles of your shoes fall off. You ragamuffin! Just put 5 farthings in your mouth, and then you may be worth 3 halfpence." And went on abusing him as fast as he could speak. As soon as he had refreshed himself a little in this way, and got his breath again, he ran into the town to the justice. "My lord judge," he said, "I have come to make a complaint. See how a rascal has robbed and ill-treated me on the public highway. A stone on the ground might pity me. My clothes all torn, my body pricked and scratched, my little all gone with my purse. Good ducats, each piece better than the last. For God's sake, let the man be thrown into prison." "Was it a soldier," said the judge, "who cut you thus with his saber?" "Nothing of the sort," said the Jew. "It was no sword that he had, but a gun hanging at his back and a fiddle at his neck. The wretch may easily be known." So the judge sent his people out after the man, and they found the good servant, who had been going quite slowly along. And they found, too, the purse with the money upon him. As soon as he was taken before the judge, he said, "I did not touch the Jew, nor take his troy. He gave it to me of his own free will, that I might leave off fiddling, because he could not bear my music. "Heaven defend us," cried the Jew. "His lies are as thick as flies upon the wall." But the judge also did not believe his tale, and said, "This is a bad defense. No Jew would do that." And because he had committed robbery on the public highway, he sentenced the good servant to be hanged. As he was being led away, the Jew again screamed after him, "You vagabond! You dog of a fiddler! Now you are going to receive your well-earned reward." The servant walked quietly with the hangman up the ladder. But upon the last step, he turned round and said to the judge, "Grant me just one request before I die." "Yes, if you do not ask your life," said the judge. "I do not ask for life," answered the servant. "But as a last favor, let me play once more upon my fiddle." The Jew raised a great cry of, "Murder! Murder! For goodness sake, do not allow it! Do not allow it!" But the judge said, "Why should I not let him have this short pleasure? It has been granted to him, and he shall have it." However, he could not have refused on account of the gift which had been bestowed on the servant. Then the Jew cried, "Oh, woe's me! Tie me fast!" While the good servant took his fiddle from his neck and made ready. As he gave the first scrape, they all began to quiver and shake. The judge, his clerk, and the hangman, and his men. And the cord fell out of the hand of the one who was going to tie the Jew fast. At the second scrape, all raised their legs, and the hangman let go his hold of the good servant, and made himself ready to dance. At the third scrape, they all leaped up and began to dance, the judge and the Jew being the best at jumping. Soon all who had gathered in the marketplace out of curiosity were dancing with them, old and young, fat and lean, one with another. The dogs, likewise, which had run there, got up on their hind legs and capered about. And the longer he played, the higher sprang the dancers, so that they knocked against each other's heads and began to shriek terribly. At length, the judge cried, quite of breath, "I will give you your life if you will only stop fiddling." The good servant thereupon had compassion, took his fiddle and hung it round his neck again, and stepped down the ladder. Then he went up to the Jew, who was lying upon the ground, panting for breath, and said, "You rascal, now confess whence you got the money, or I will take my fiddle and begin to play again." I stole it, cried he, "but you have honestly earned it." So the judge had the Jew taken to the gallows and hanged as a thief. The Jew Among Thorns. There was once a rich man who had a servant who served him diligently and honestly. He was every morning the first out of bed and the last to go to rest at night. And whenever there was a difficult job to be done, which nobody cared to undertake, he was always the first to set himself to it. Moreover, he never complained, but was contented with everything, and always merry. When a year was ended, his master gave him no wages, for he said to himself, "That is the cleverest way, for I shall save something, and he will not go away, but stay quietly in my service." The servant said nothing, but did his work the second year as he had done it the first. And when at the end of this, likewise, he received no wages, he made himself happy, and still stayed on. When the third year also was past, the master considered, put his hand in his pocket, but pulled nothing out. Then at last the servant said, "Master, for 3 years I have served you honestly. Be so good as to give me what I ought to have, for I wish to leave and look about me a little more in the world." "Yes, my good fellow," answered the old miser. "You have served me industriously, and therefore you shall be cheerfully rewarded." And he put his hand into his pocket, but counted out only 3 farthings, saying, "There, you have a farthing for each year. That is large and liberal pay, such as you would have received from few masters." The honest servant, who understood little about money, put his fortune into his pocket, and thought, "Ah, now that I have my purse full, why need I trouble and plague myself any longer with hard work?" So on he went, up hill and down dale, and sang and jumped to his heart's content. Now it came to pass that as he was going by a thicket, a little man stepped out and called to him, "Whither away, merry brother? I see you do not carry many cares." "Why should I be sad?" answered the servant. "I have enough. 3 years' wages are jingling in my pocket." "How much is your treasure?" the dwarf asked him. "How much?" 3 farthings sterling, all told." "Look here," said the dwarf, "I am a poor, needy man. Give me your 3 farthings. I can work no longer, but you are young and can easily earn your bread." And as the servant had a good heart and felt pity for the old man, he gave him the 3 farthings, saying, "Take them in the name of heaven. I shall not be any the worse for it." Then the little man said, "As I see you have a good heart, I grant you 3 wishes. 1 for each farthing. They shall all be fulfilled." "Aha," said the servant. "You are one of those who can work wonders. Well then, if it is to be so, I wish first for a gun, which shall hit everything that I aim at. Secondly, for a fiddle, which, when I play on it, shall compel all who hear it to dance. Thirdly, that if I ask a favor of anyone, he shall not be able to refuse it." "All that shall you have," said the dwarf, and put his hand into the bush, and only think, there lay a fiddle and gun, all ready, just as if they had been ordered. These he gave to the servant, and then said to him, "Whatever you may ask at any time, no man in the world shall be able to deny you." Heart alive! What can one desire more? Said the servant to himself, and went merrily onwards. Soon afterwards, he met a Jew with a long goat's beard, who was standing listening to the song of a bird which was sitting up at the top of a tree. "Good heavens!" he was exclaiming, "that such a small creature should have such a fearfully loud voice. If it were but mine! If only someone would sprinkle some salt upon its tail." "If that is all," said the servant, "the bird shall soon be down here." And taking aim, he pulled the trigger, and down fell the bird into the thorn bushes. "Go, you rogue," he said to the Jew, "and fetch the bird out for yourself." "Oh," said the Jew, "leave out the rogue, my master, and I will do it at once. I will get the bird out for myself, as you really have hit it." Then he lay down on the ground and began to crawl into the thicket. When he was fast among the thorns, the good servant's humor so tempted him that he took up his fiddle and began to play. In a moment, the Jew's legs began to move and to jump into the air, and the more the servant fiddled, the better went the dance. But the thorns tore his shabby coat from him, combed his beard, and pricked and plucked him all over the body. "Oh dear," cried the Jew, "what do I want with your fiddling? Leave the fiddle alone, master. I do not want to dance." But the servant did not listen to him, and thought, "You have fleeced people often enough. Now the thorn bushes shall do the same to you." And he began to play over again, so that the Jew had to jump higher than ever, and scraps of his coat were left hanging on the thorns. "Oh, woe's me!" cried the Jew. "I will give the gentleman whatsoever he asks, if only he leaves off fiddling a purse full of gold." "If you are so liberal," said the servant, "I will stop my music. But this I must say to your credit, that you dance to it so well that it is quite an art." And having taken the purse, he went his way. The Jew stood still and watched the servant quietly until he was far off and out of sight. And then he screamed out with all his might, "You miserable musician! You beer-house fiddler! Wait till I catch you alone. I will hunt you till the soles of your shoes fall off. You ragamuffin! Just put 5 farthings in your mouth, and then you may be worth 3 halfpence." And went on abusing him as fast as he could speak. as soon as he had refreshed himself a little in this way, and got his breath again, he ran into the town to the justice. "My lord judge," he said, "I have come to make a complaint. See how a rascal has robbed and ill-treated me on the public highway. A stone on the ground might pity me. My clothes all torn, my body pricked and scratched, my little all gone with my purse. Good ducats, each piece better than the last. For God's sake, let the man be thrown into prison." "Was it a soldier," said the judge, "who cut you thus with his saber?" "Nothing of the sort," said the Jew. "It was no sword that he had, but a gun hanging at his back, and a fiddle at his neck. The wretch may easily be known." So the judge sent his people out after the man, and they found the good servant, who had been going quite slowly along. And they found, too, the purse with the money upon him. As soon as he was taken before the judge, he said, "I did not touch the Jew, nor take his money. He gave it to me of his own free will, that I might leave off fiddling, because he could not bear my music." "Heaven defend us," cried the Jew. "His lies are as thick as flies upon the wall." But the judge also did not believe his tale, and said, "This is a bad defense. No Jew would do that." And because he had committed robbery on the public highway, he sentenced the good servant to be hanged. As he was being led away, the Jew again screamed after him, "You vagabond! You dog of a fiddler! Now you are going to receive your well-earned reward." The servant walked quietly with the hangman up the ladder, but upon the last step he turned round and said to the judge, "Grant me just one request before I die." "Yes, if you do not ask your life," said the judge. "I do not ask for life," answered the servant. "But as a last favor, let me play once more upon my fiddle." The Jew raised a great cry of, "Murder! Murder! For goodness sake, do not allow it! Do not allow it!" But the judge said, "Why should I not let him have this short pleasure? It has been granted to him, and he shall have it." However, he could not have refused on account of the gift which had been bestowed on the servant. Then the Jew cried, "Oh, woe's me! Tie me fast!" While the good servant took his fiddle from his neck and made ready. As he gave the first scrape, they all began to quiver and shake. The judge, his clerk, and the hangman, and his men. And the cord fell out of the hand of the one who was going to tie the Jew fast. At the second scrape, all raised their legs, and the hangman let go his hold of the good servant, and made himself ready to dance. At the third scrape, they all leaped up and began to dance, the judge and the Jew being the best at jumping. Soon all who had gathered in the marketplace, out of curiosity, were dancing with them, old and young, fat and lean, one with another. The dogs, likewise, which had run there, got up on their hind legs and capered about, and the longer he played, the higher sprang the dancers, so that they knocked against each other's heads and began to shriek terribly. At length, the judge cried, quite of breath, "I will give you your life if you will only stop fiddling." The good servant thereupon had compassion, took his fiddle, and hung it round his neck again, and stepped down the ladder. Then he went up to the Jew, who was lying upon the ground, panting for breath, and said, "You rascal, now confess whence you got the money, or I will take my fiddle and begin to play again." "I stole it, I stole it," cried he, "but you have honestly earned it." So the judge had the Jew taken to the gallows and hanged as a thief. The Skilful Huntsman. There was once a young fellow who had learnt the trade of locksmith, and told his father he would now go out into the world and seek his fortune. "Very well," said the father, "I am quite content with that," and gave him some money for his journey. So he traveled about and looked for work. After a time, he resolved not to follow the trade of locksmith any more, for he no longer liked it, but he took a fancy for hunting. Then there met him in his rambles a huntsman dressed in green, who asked whence he came and whither he was going. The youth said he was a locksmith's apprentice, but that the trade no longer pleased him, and he had a liking for huntsmanship. Would he teach it to him? "Oh yes," said the huntsman, "if thou wilt go with me." Then the young fellow went with him, bound himself to him for some years, and learnt the art of hunting. After this, he wished to try his luck elsewhere, and the huntsman gave him nothing in the way of payment but an air gun, which had, however, this property, that it hit its mark without fail whenever he shot with it. Then he set out and found himself in a very large forest, which he could not get to the end of in one day. When evening came, he seated himself in a high tree in order to escape from the wild beasts. Towards midnight, it seemed to him as if a tiny little light glimmered in the distance. Then he looked down through the branches towards it, and kept well in his mind where it was. But in the first place, he took off his hat and threw it down in the direction of the light, so that he might go to the hat as a mark when he had descended. Then he got down and went to his hat, put it on again, and went straight forwards. The farther he went, the larger the light grew. And when he got close to it, he saw that it was an enormous fire, and that 3 giants were sitting by it, who had an ox on the spit, and were roasting it. Presently, one of them said, I must just taste if the meat will soon be fit to eat," and pulled a piece off, and was about to put it in his mouth when the huntsman shot it out of his hand. "Well, really," said the giant, "if the wind has not blown the bit out of my hand," and helped himself to another. But when he was just about to bite into it, the huntsman again shot it away from him. On this, the giant gave the one who was sitting next him a box on the ear, and cried angrily, "Why art thou snatching my piece away from me?" "I have not snatched it away," said the other. "A sharp shooter must have shot it away from thee." The giant took another piece, but could not, however, keep it in his hand, for the huntsman shot it out. Then the giant said, "That must be a good shot to shoot the bit out of one's very mouth. Such an one would be useful to us." And he cried aloud, "Come here, thou sharpshooter, seat thyself at the fire beside us, and eat thy fill. We will not hurt thee. But if thou wilt not come, and we have to bring thee by force, thou art a lost man." On this, the youth went up to them, and told them he was a skilled huntsman, and that whatever he aimed at with his gun, he was certain to hit. Then they said if he would go with them, he should be well treated. And they told him that outside the forest there was a great lake, behind which stood a tower. And in the tower was imprisoned a lovely princess, whom they wished very much to carry off. "Yes," said he, "I will soon get her for you." Then they added, "But there is still something else. There is a tiny little dog, which begins to bark directly anyone goes near. And as soon as it barks, everyone in the royal palace wakens up. And for this reason, we cannot get there. Canst thou undertake to shoot it dead?" "Yes," said he, "that will be a little bit of fun for me." After this, he got into a boat and rowed over the lake. And as soon as he landed, the little dog came running out and was about to bark. But the huntsman took his air gun and shot it dead. When the giants saw that, they rejoiced and thought they already had the king's daughter safe. But the huntsman wished first to see how matters stood, and told them that they must stay outside until he called them. Then he went into the castle, and all was perfectly quiet within, and everyone was asleep. When he opened the door of the first room, a sword was hanging on the wall, which was made of pure silver, and there was a golden star on it, and the name of the king. And on a table near it lay a sealed letter which he broke open, and inside it was written that whosoever had the sword could kill everything which opposed him. So he took the sword from the wall, hung it at his side, and went onwards. Then he entered the room where the king's daughter was lying sleeping, and she was so beautiful that he stood still and, holding his breath, looked at her. He thought to himself, How can I give an innocent maiden into the power of the wild giants, who have evil in their minds?" He looked about further, and under the bed stood a pair of slippers. On the right one was her father's name with a star, and on the left her own name with a star. She wore also a great neck kerchief of silk embroidered with gold, and on the right side was her father's name, and on the left her own, all in golden letters. Then the huntsman took a pair of scissors and cut the right corner off, and put it in his knapsack. And then he also took the right slipper with the king's name, and thrust that in. Now the maiden still lay sleeping, and she was quite sewn into her nightdress, and he cut a morsel from this also, and thrust it in with the rest. But he did all without touching her. Then he went forth, and left her lying asleep undisturbed. And when he came to the gate again, the giants were still standing outside, waiting for him, and expecting that he was bringing the princess. But he cried to them that they were to come in, for the maiden was already in their power, that he could not open the gate to them, but there was a hole through which they must creep. Then the first approached, and the huntsman wound the giant's hair round his hand, pulled the head in, and cut it off at one stroke with his sword, and then drew the rest of him in. He called to the second, and cut his head off likewise, and then he killed the third also. And he was well pleased that he had freed the beautiful maiden from her enemies, and he cut out their tongues and put them in his knapsack. Then thought he, "I will go home to my father, and let him see what I have already done. And afterwards I will travel about the world. The luck which God is pleased to grant me will easily find me." But when the king in the castle awoke, he saw the 3 giants lying there dead. So he went into the sleeping room of his daughter, awoke her, and asked who could have killed the giants. Then said she, "Dear father, I know not. I have been asleep." But when she arose and would have put on her slippers, the right one was gone. And when she looked at her neck kerchief, it was cut, and the right corner was missing. And when she looked at her nightdress, a piece was cut out of it. The king summoned his whole court together, soldiers and everyone else who was there, and asked who had set his daughter at liberty, and killed the giants. Now it happened that he had a captain, who was one-eyed and a hideous man, and he said that he had done it. Then the old king said that as he had accomplished this, he should marry his daughter. But the maiden said, "Rather than marry him, dear father, I will go away into the world as far as my legs can carry me." But the king said that if she would not marry him, she should take off her royal garments and wear peasant's clothing, and go forth, and that she should go to a potter and begin a trade in earthen vessels. So she put off her royal apparel and went to a potter and borrowed crockery enough for a stall. And she promised him also that if she had sold it by the evening, she would pay for it. Then the king said she was to seat herself in a corner with it and sell it. And he arranged with some peasants to drive over it with their carts, so that everything should be broken into 1,000 pieces. When therefore the king's daughter had placed her stall in the street, by came the carts, and broke all she had into tiny fragments. She began to weep, and said, "Alas, how shall I ever pay for the pots now?" The king had, however, wished by this to force her to marry the captain. But instead of that, she again went to the potter and asked him if he would lend to her once more. He said, "No. She must first pay for the things she had already had." Then she went to her father and cried and lamented, and said she would go forth into the world. Then said he, "I will have a little hut built for thee in the forest outside, and in it thou shalt stay all thy life long, and cook for everyone. But thou shalt take no money for it." When the hut was ready, a sign was hung on the door, whereon was written, "Today given, tomorrow sold." There she remained a long time, and it was rumored about the world that a maiden was there who cooked without asking for payment, and that this was set forth on a sign outside her door. The huntsman heard it likewise, and thought to himself, "That would suit thee. Thou art poor, and hast no money." So he took his air gun and his knapsack, wherein all the things which he had formerly carried away with him from the castle as tokens of his truthfulness were still lying, and went into the forest, and found the hut with the sign, "Today given, tomorrow sold." He had put on the sword with which he had cut off the heads of the 3 giants, and thus entered the hut, and ordered something to eat to be given to him. He was charmed with the beautiful maiden, who was indeed as lovely as any picture. She asked him whence he came and whither he was going. And he said, "I am roaming about the world." Then she asked him where he had got the sword, for that truly her father's name was on it. He asked her if she were the king's daughter. "Yes," answered she. "With this sword," said he, "did I cut off the heads of 3 giants." And he took their tongues out of his knapsack in proof. Then he also showed her the slipper, and the corner of the neck-kerchief, and the bit of the night-dress. Hereupon she was overjoyed, and said that he was the one who had delivered her. On this they went together to the old king, and fetched him to the hut. And she led him into her room, and told him that the huntsman was the man who had really set her free from the giants. And when the aged king saw all the proofs of this, he could no longer doubt, and said that he was very glad he knew how everything had happened, and that the huntsman should have her to wife, on which the maiden was glad at heart. Then she dressed the huntsman as if he were a foreign lord, and the king ordered a feast to be prepared. When they went to table, the captain sat on the left side of the king's daughter, but the huntsman was on the right, and the captain thought he was a foreign lord who had come on a visit. When they had eaten and drunk, the old king said to the captain that he would set before him something which he must guess. Supposing anyone said that he had killed the 3 giants, and he were asked where the giants' tongues were, and he were forced to go and look, and there were none in their heads, how could that happen? The captain said, "Then they cannot have had any." "Not so," said the king. "Every animal has a tongue." And then he likewise asked what anyone would deserve who made such an answer. The captain replied, "He ought to be torn in pieces." Then the king said he had pronounced his own sentence, and the captain was put in prison and then torn in 4 pieces. But the king's daughter was married to the huntsman. After this, he brought his father and mother, and they lived with their son in happiness. And after the death of the old king, he received the kingdom. The Flail from Heaven. Once upon a time, in a quiet corner of the land where meadows rolled and the soil was dark and rich, there lived a humble countryman. His life was bound to the rhythm of the seasons. Each spring he plowed, each autumn he harvested, and in between he prayed that the heavens would bless his labor. One clear morning, he yoked his pair of sturdy oxen and set out to plow a field that lay beyond the village gate. The beasts were strong, with horns curved like crescents, and the man trusted them as one trusts faithful servants. But as soon as he set his plow into the furrow, a strange marvel occurred. The horns of the oxen began to grow. At first, only a finger's breadth, then another, and still they grew, long and longer, higher and higher, until they seemed as tall as young trees in the spring. The man marveled and trembled. He urged the oxen on, but the horns would not cease their growth. By the time the day's work was done, each beast carried upon its head a crown of horns so vast that when the countryman led them back toward his cottage, they could not pass through the narrow wooden gate. Their horns caught and locked above the lintel, barring the way, as if the beasts had become prisoners of their own magnificence. The poor man wrung his hands. "What shall I do with you, my faithful servants?" he cried. At that very moment, Fortune sent along the dusty road a butcher from the next town. He was a sharp-eyed man quick at bargains. Seeing the plight of the peasant, he offered help. "Sell the oxen to me," said the butcher, "and I shall free you from your trouble. We will make a fair bargain. For a measure of turnip seed you will bring me. I shall pay you a Brabant thaler for every seed it holds." The peasant thought long and hard. It seemed a strange bargain, yet the man spoke with such certainty that he agreed. Thus the oxen passed to the butcher, and the peasant, relieved of his burden, went home content. The next morning, he filled a measure with turnip seed, heavy upon his back, and carried it along the road to the butcher's house. But as fate would have it, one small seed slipped from the sack, fell to the ground, and was lost. The butcher, true to his word, counted out a shining thaler for every seed delivered. Yet, had the peasant not lost the one, he would have been richer by another coin. So he went away, glad, but pondering that a single seed, carelessly lost, might cost dearly. Now here begins the greater wonder. As the man trudged back along the path, his eyes were drawn upward. The very seed that had slipped from his sack had taken root, and in the short span of hours, it had grown into a mighty stalk. Upward it climbed, past the tallest oaks, past the mountains, past the clouds themselves, until it pierced the blue heavens above. The peasant gazed in awe. "Since heaven itself has given me this ladder, I shall not waste the chance," he said. "I will climb and see with my own eyes what the angels do above." So he set his hands upon the stalk and climbed. Higher and higher he went, until the earth below looked like a child's toy, and the wind blew cold about him. At last he reached the summit and found himself in a land of brightness, where the angels of heaven dwelt. There he saw with his own eyes the holy ones threshing oats, as mortal peasants thresh in their barns, yet with strokes so light and swift that the golden grains flew like sparks of fire. The man stood watching, filled with wonder. But while he gazed, the stalk on which he rested began to tremble and sway. He peered downward and saw that, far below, someone was raising an axe to fell the mighty stalk. "Alas," thought the peasant, "if the tree falls, I shall fall with it, and that will be the end of me." In his distress, he sought some means of escape. Near at hand lay heaps of chaff left by the threshing. Quick as need required, he twisted the chaff into a rope strong enough to bear him. From the floor of heaven, he also snatched up a hoe and a flail that lay idle. With these in hand, he tied the rope fast and lowered himself into the air. Down he swung, swaying between sky and earth, until he landed, not upon the green fields of home, but in the heart of a deep and dreadful pit, dark as night. Yet the peasant was not forsaken, for had he not brought the hoe, he would have remained imprisoned forever. With the iron, he carved steps into the earthen wall, slowly mounting upward until once more he stood upon the good, solid ground of the earth. And the flail he carried with him as a witness of his truth, so that none could call his tale a lie. Whoever doubted his story, he could show them the very tool of heaven, and they would be silenced. Thus the poor countryman, by chance and wit, gained wonders beyond reckoning. Thalers from seed, a sight of angels, a flail from heaven, and the knowledge that even one small seed may open the gates of marvels. And that is the end of the tale.